Bakersfield, California in July was a furnace. Heat shimmered off asphalt in waves that made the horizon waver like a mirage. Cole Bennett's trailer, a 1987 single-wide with rust eating through the skirting and an AC unit that wheezed more than it cooled, sat at the edge of a dirt lot where the city gave up trying to be respectable. At 39, Cole looked a decade older. 5 years of overnight security shifts, ramen dinners, and black coffee breakfasts had hollowed out the SEAL who'd once carried 80-pound packs through Afghan mountains. His dark hair was too long, graying at the temples. His blue eyes, once sharp enough to spot IEDs from 50 yards, now avoided mirrors because he didn't recognize the man staring back. He'd been one of the best. 3 deployments, 14 confirmed terrorist neutralizations, 0 friendly casualties on his watch. Then he'd rotated stateside to train Hell Week at Bud S, passing on the skills that had kept him alive to the next generation of operators. The drowning happened during week 4 of first phase, the infamous Hell Week, where candidates endured 5.5 days of continuous training on less than 4 hours of sleep total. Cole had been supervising surf torture evolution, watching 22 candidates lie in freezing Pacific water while instructors shouted encouragement and temptation to quit. One recruit, Dylan Marsh, 23 years old from Iowa, had started seizing. Cole had responded immediately, pulled him from the water, initiated CPR, called medical, performed textbook life-saving procedures. Dylan died anyway. Cardiac arrest. Undiagnosed heart condition that shouldn't have made it through initial screening, but did because paperwork got shuffled and protocols got skipped. The official investigation cleared Cole completely. Medical review confirmed he'd done everything right. Command offered sympathy, counseling, and reassurance that this was a tragic but unavoidable accident. But Cole saw Dylan's face every time he closed his eyes. Saw the moment the kid stopped fighting, the exact second when Cole's chest compressions became futile. Saw the parents at the funeral, their grief transforming their son's death into a failure that wore Cole's name. He started drinking to sleep. Vodka first, then whatever was cheap. Missed formations. Showed up to training still buzzed from the night before. The teams gave him chances. Counseling, probation, medical leave. Cole refused all of it. When they scheduled another board review, he took early separation instead. Honorable discharge, full benefits, and a handshake that felt like abandonment. The only thing he'd fought to keep was Ranger. The 6-year-old black and tan German Shepherd had been Cole's partner through 3 deployments: explosive detection, personnel tracking, compound clearing. The dog had saved Cole's life twice, once by detecting an IED before the convoy reached it, once by alerting to an ambush 30 seconds before it materialized. During their final mission, an IED had detonated close enough that the concussive blast permanently damaged Ranger's hearing. The dog could still function, but military working dogs needed perfect sensory capability. Ranger was retired at 5 years old, young for a GSD, but old for the job's demands. No one wanted a partially deaf combat dog. The kennel master suggested euthanasia. Cole had driven straight from his separation, processing to the kennels, and signed the adoption papers. If the military was done with both of them, at least they'd be done together. 5 years later, Ranger was the only reason Cole bothered coming home after overnight shifts at the warehouse. The dog couldn't hear commands anymore, but he could read Cole's body language with precision that bordered on telepathic. Hand signals replaced verbal cues, Touch replaced sound. They'd adapted. This particular July afternoon, Cole returned at 6 a.m. from a 12-hour shift guarding a distribution center that mostly needed someone to exist as deterrent rather than defense. He was exhausted, dehydrated, and looking forward to the routine. Feed Ranger, collapse on the couch, sleep until the heat became unbearable. Ranger was waiting at the door, but not in his usual patient stance. The dog was agitated, whining, pawing at Cole's leg, moving back and forth between the door and the side of the trailer with urgent intensity. "What's wrong, bud?" Cole asked, signing the question out of habit, even though Ranger's eyes were locked on the trailer's skirting. Ranger ran to the side of the trailer and began digging frantically at the metal skirting, claws scraping, head pushing against the corrugated panel. Behavior Cole hadn't seen since their last deployment, when the dog had alerted to an enemy combatant hiding in rubble. Cole followed, adrenaline cutting through exhaustion. Ranger was a combat tracker who'd learned that certain smells meant human presence, danger, urgency. If the dog was alerting like this, something was wrong. "Show me," Cole said, using the hand signal for search. Ranger pawed at a specific section where the skirting had pulled away from the frame. Cole knelt, pulled back the metal panel, and looked into the crawl space beneath the trailer. It took his eyes a moment to adjust to the darkness. Then he saw her, a child, 6, maybe 7 years old, wedged between concrete blocks and the metal frame of the trailer's undercarriage, barely breathing. Her skin was grayish-pale, lips cracked and bleeding from severe dehydration. She was covered in bruises, some fresh and purple, others yellowed with age, creating a timeline of violence across her small body. A fresh gash across her forehead was still oozing blood mixed with dirt. She wore a pink nightgown, now filthy and torn, with cartoon characters that seemed obscene given the context. Cole's combat medic training overrode shock. He crawled under the trailer, speaking softly. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm Cole. I'm going to help you. Can you hear me?" No response. Her eyes were half closed, unfocused. He checked her pulse. Thread already, dangerously slow. Respirations, shallow and irregular. Core temperature. Despite the July heat, she was cold. Severe dehydration causing circulatory failure. No obvious spinal injuries from how she was positioned, but he stabilized her neck anyway before carefully extracting her from the crawl space. Ranger was waiting, whining with desperate gentleness. The moment Cole laid the girl on the ground, the dog positioned himself beside her and began licking her hand. Not aggressive or excited, but with the careful attention of a working dog performing a mission. Cole carried her inside, laid her on the couch, and began emergency rehydration protocols. Small sips of water mixed with electrolytes. Too much too fast would cause her system to crash. Cool compresses to lower her core temperature gradually. Monitoring for signs of shock or organ failure. He noticed the hospital bracelet on her wrist, white plastic with faded lettering. Patient 41187, supervised visitation only. Supervised visitation, meaning she was in the system, meaning someone was supposed to be watching her, meaning this level of dehydration, these layered bruises, this terror. It had all happened under official supervision. As he worked, Ranger never left her side. The dog's presence seemed to calm her, even unconscious. 20 minutes later, her eyes opened. Cole expected crying, screaming, the normal fear response of a child waking to a strange man in a strange place. Instead, she just stared at him with blank expression that Cole recognized from war zones. the look of someone who'd learned that showing fear brought pain, who'd learned that survival meant silence. "You're safe," Cole said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you. This is Ranger. He found you. He's a good dog." Her eyes moved to Ranger, and something flickered in her face. Her hand reached out, touching the dog's fur with desperate gentleness. Ranger's tail wagged once, slowly. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Cole asked. Her lips moved, voice barely audible, hoarse from dehydration and screaming, "Sophie. Sophie, can you tell me what happened? Who hurt you?" Her hand tightened in Ranger's fur. She looked at Cole with eyes too old for her face and whispered one word that made his blood run cold. "Monster." Cole had seen monsters before. In Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. He'd hunted them, killed them, slept soundly afterward, knowing the world was safer without them. But this was different. This monster operated in daylight, with paperwork and official sanction, and Sophie had escaped into his care for a reason Ranger had detected with senses Cole didn't fully understand. He looked at the dog, at the girl, at the hospital bracelet that represented systematic failure. Looked at his own hands, scarred from combat, steady despite 5 years of vodka, and felt something he hadn't felt since Dylan Marsh drowned. Purpose. "Sophie," Cole said gently, "the monster isn't going to find you here. I promise." Over the next 48 hours, Cole pieced together Sophie's story through fragmented whispers and drawings she made with crayons he'd bought at a dollar store. Spending money he didn't have, because the alternative was watching her stare at walls in silence. Her name was Sophie Reeves. She'd been in foster care for 8 months with Brian Carver, a 42-year-old youth counselor who presented himself as a devoted single father, providing homes for difficult children. Sophie drew pictures of a basement, bars on a tiny window, a mattress on concrete, a door with multiple locks. She drew herself small and alone. She drew a man, tall, smiling, with hands that reached. The bruises told their own story. Different stages of healing meant repeated violence. The cigarette burn on her shoulder was recent. The ligature marks on her wrists were layered. She'd been restrained multiple times. Sophie whispered details between long silences. Carver kept her locked in the basement most days, brought her up only when social workers visited. Those days, he drugged her with something that made her foggy and compliant. When she tried to tell a caseworker the truth 3 months ago, Carver had put her in the basement for 4 days without food. The next visit, she'd stayed silent. 3 days ago, Carver had told her she was being transferred to someone else. Sophie understood what that meant. She'd heard him on the phone talking about merchandise and delivery. She'd escaped through the basement window that night, ran until her legs gave out, and crawled under the first shelter she found. Ranger had detected her despite his hearing damage. The dog's nose, his most reliable sense, had identified human presence, distress, and the chemical signature of fear. Cole knew he should call authorities immediately, should dial 911, report a missing foster child, hand her over to Child Protective Services. But Sophie's terror at the mention of police or social workers stopped him. She'd begged, actually begged, not to go back into the system. Instead, Cole made one call, to Jack Moreno, a former SEAL teammate, now working as a private investigator in Los Angeles. "Jackie, it's Cole. Need a favor. Background check on a foster parent named Brian Carver, Bakersfield area." Jack's response came back in 6 hours. Carver had fostered 19 children over 6 years, had glowing reviews from Child Protective Services, was considered a miracle worker with traumatized kids. 3 social workers had nominated him for state recognition. He was protected by a system that desperately needed foster parents and didn't look too closely at volunteers. Cole conducted surveillance using skills he thought he'd forgotten. Late-night observation of Carver's home revealed military-style security. Cameras, motion sensors, reinforced locks. The basement windows were barred. No children visible during daylight hours, but Cole spotted movement behind curtains, multiple small shadows that shouldn't exist in a single child placement. Jack dug deeper. Carver wasn't working alone. 3 other foster parents in Kern County, all connected through a private online forum disguised as a support group for foster parents of trauma survivors. The forum used coded language. Difficult behaviors actually meant abuse tactics. Placement transfers meant trafficking. Intensive interventions meant something worse. Cole felt rage building, not the hot fury that made men stupid, but the cold operational anger that made SEALs dangerous. This wasn't opportunistic crime. This was systematic predation, using institutional trust as camouflage. The turning point came on day 3. Cole woke to Ranger's urgent alert, the dog pawing at his chest, staring at the window with focused intensity. Through the blinds, Cole saw 2 vehicles approaching, a white sedan and a sheriff's cruiser. Brian Carver emerged from the sedan. 42 years old, average build, wearing khakis and a polo shirt like he was attending a PTA meeting. His smile was practiced warmth. The sheriff's deputy who followed was younger, uncertain, clearly related to Carver by the family resemblance. Sophie saw them through the window and went rigid. Silent scream, frozen terror. Carver knocked, polite, professional, the sound of someone who expected cooperation. Cole opened the door 6 inches, body-blocking entry, Ranger sitting at his heel in perfect military working dog stance. "Mr. Bennett?" Carver's voice was smooth concern. "I'm Brian Carver. I believe you have Sophie Reeves here. She's one of my foster children, has severe attachment disorder, and runs away during the episodes. Thank God she's safe. Poor girl probably scared you with her stories." "She's not here," Cole said evenly. The deputy sheriff's badge read R. Carver, confirming Cole's suspicion about family connections, stepped forward with paperwork. "Sir, we have legal custody documentation. Sophie is a ward of Mr. Carver through court order. Refusing to return her constitutes custodial interference." Carver smiled wider. "Sophie has issues, Mr. Bennett. She fantasizes abuse stories for attention. Very sad. Her therapist has documented everything. We just want to get her home where she can receive proper care." Behind Cole, Sophie whimpered. Tiny sound of absolute terror. Ranger's body language shifted. The dog couldn't hear commands well anymore, but he could read Cole's tension and Sophie's fear with perfect accuracy. Deputy Carver reached past Cole toward the door. "We're coming. In." Ranger interposed himself between the deputy and the doorway. Silent, professional, absolute. "Control your animal," Deputy Carver said, hand moving to his weapon. "Or I'll put it down for aggression." The threat to Ranger flipped Cole's switch, not rage, operational clarity. He saw Dylan Marsh's face, drowning, dying despite Cole's best efforts. Saw 5 years of guilt and vodka and failure. Saw Sophie's bruises and Ranger's loyalty and a system so broken it protected monsters, and knew he'd been given a second chance to save someone. Cole moved with surgical precision, honed by a decade of close-quarters combat. He trapped Deputy Carver's reaching arm, applied a joint lock that produced a yelp of pain, stripped the deputy's service weapon in 2 seconds, and used the man's own handcuffs to secure him to the porch railing. Brian Carver lunged forward. Mistake. Cole put him face down on the trailer steps with a wrist lock that left the predator gasping. Ranger stood over Carver, not biting, but presenting teeth, reading Cole's body language that said, "Threat contained." Cole's voice was dead calm, the tone he'd used giving combat orders. "You're going to confess everything, because I recorded every word you just said about attachment disorder and fantasy stories. The exact phrases you used on your forum last week when discussing how to discredit victims. And because the FBI is listening right now." It was true. Cole had called Jack 36 hours earlier. Jack had brought in federal contacts, agents from the FBI's Innocence Lost National Initiative, who'd been monitoring Carver's network for 2 months, building a case but needing someone inside to break it open. The trailer had been wired. Every conversation recorded. Carver's approach, his dismissive language about Sophie, his threats, all captured. Carver's phone started ringing. FBI agents were executing synchronized warrants across 4 locations. "Your network is done," Cole said quietly. "Your forum's encrypted files are being analyzed. The 17 children you and your partners are currently fostering are being recovered." And Sophie. He looked back at the girl who was watching from the doorway with Ranger pressed against her leg. Sophie is never going back to any basement. Ever. FBI vehicles arrived 60 seconds later. Special Agent Lisa Chen took command, reading rights, processing evidence, coordinating the multi-site raid with clinical efficiency. Cole stood on his trailer steps, watching Sophie give her statement to a trauma-specialized interviewer with Ranger sitting beside her as emotional support. The dog's deaf ears couldn't hear her words, but his presence said everything that mattered. "You're safe. I'm here. You're not alone." Agent Chen approached Cole. "Mr. Bennett, you just dismantled a trafficking network we've been investigating for 6 months. Carver's phone has evidence connecting 4 foster parents, 12 facilitators, and 3 out-of-state buyers." Cole nodded, numb. "Also," Chen continued carefully, "we reopened the investigation into Seaman Dylan Marsh's death, based on recommendations from your former teammate, Mr. Moreno. New evidence shows Marsh had an undiagnosed cardiac condition. Your rescue attempts were textbook. The outcome was inevitable." The words took a moment to register. 5 years of guilt. 5 years of vodka. 5 years of seeing Dylan's face. "You did everything right," Chen said. "Then and now." The FBI raid dismantled the entire network with the precision of a military operation. 4 foster parents arrested simultaneously. 17 children recovered from various placements, basements, locked rooms, rural properties where screaming wouldn't be heard. Digital evidence from the encrypted forum revealed 8 years of systematic abuse and trafficking, with detailed records of problem children being moved between locations. Brian Carver's phone became the key that unlocked everything. Messages to handlers coordinating transfers. Financial records showing payments of $15,000 per child delivered to out-of-state buyers. Photographs documenting abuse used as blackmail to ensure compliance. Deputy R. Carver lost his badge and faced obstruction charges. The county's Child Protective Services underwent complete federal oversight. 3 social workers were terminated for negligence. 1 supervisor faced criminal charges for accepting bribes to overlook complaints. The case made national news. Foster care network exposed. Veteran saves trafficked children. Former SEAL uncovers abuse ring. Cole ignored all of it. Media requests went unanswered. Interview offers were declined. He'd done what needed doing. The attention was irrelevant. Sophie entered a specialized trauma treatment program designed for child trafficking survivors. State-of-the-art facility. Trauma-informed therapists, not 24-hour support. She should have been healing. Instead, she stopped speaking entirely. The therapist tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, EMDR, medication. Sophie participated mechanically, but remained emotionally absent. She ate when told, slept when scheduled, existed without living. 3 weeks in, the program director called Cole. "Mr. Bennett, Sophie has been asking for Ranger. She won't engage with treatment, but she keeps drawing pictures of your dog. Would you be willing to bring him for a visit?" Cole arrived the next day. Ranger was graying now, his limp more pronounced, but his nose still worked perfectly. The moment they entered Sophie's room, the dog moved directly to her bed and placed his head on her lap, the same gesture from that first day. Sophie's hands found Ranger's fur, and she started crying, deep, gasping sobs that shook her small body. The first real emotion she'd shown since entering treatment. "He can't hear me," Sophie whispered, burying her face in Ranger's neck. "I can scream, and he doesn't care. He just stays." Cole understood. Ranger's deafness made him safe. Sophie could express everything without fear of reaction, could be loud, messy, broken, and the dog would simply exist beside her, offering presence without judgment. The program director revised Sophie's treatment plan. 3 weekly visits with Ranger and Cole. No pressure to talk, just being together. Building trust through consistency instead of demands. During those visits, Cole taught Sophie hand signals, the same ones he used with Ranger. Sit, stay, come. The dog obeyed perfectly, reading visual cues with precision his damaged ears couldn't provide. "He's deaf, but he's not broken," Sophie said during their 5th visit. First complete sentence she'd spoken in weeks. "No," Cole agreed. "He's adapted. Different doesn't mean broken." Sophie looked at Cole with those 2 old eyes. "Are you broken?" Honest answer. "I was, for a long time. But I think I'm adapting now." Meanwhile, Jack Moreno's investigation into Dylan Marsh's death concluded. Medical examiner's review confirmed undiagnosed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a heart condition that made Marsh a ticking time bomb during the extreme physical stress of Hell Week. Cole's CPR had been textbook. His response time had been immediate. The outcome had been medically inevitable. The Navy issued formal exoneration. A letter from the Chief of Naval Operations acknowledged that Cole had been failed by incomplete medical screening, not the other way around. An offer came with the letter: return to Buds as civilian contractor teaching water survival and emergency medicine, turning his trauma into expertise that might save future recruits. Cole accepted, not because he needed redemption, but because preventing the next drowning mattered more than forgetting the last one. 6 months after Sophie's rescue, Cole moved into a small house with a fenced yard. County settlement from the foster care negligence lawsuit provided funding. The house had 3 bedrooms, one for Cole, one for Sophie during weekend visits, one for Ranger, who needed ground floor access for his aging joints. Sophie's therapeutic foster placement was nearby. Her new foster parents, Maria and Tom Chen, a couple with 20 years of trauma-specialized care, understood that healing wasn't linear and safety wasn't negotiable. They supported Sophie's weekend visits with Cole and Ranger, recognizing that chosen family sometimes mattered more than assigned placement. Those weekends became ritual. Saturday mornings, Sophie helped Cole teach Ranger new tricks using hand signals the deaf dog could see. Saturday afternoons, they worked in the garden Sophie had insisted on planting. Tomatoes, peppers, flowers she chose because they were happy colors. Saturday evenings, they sat on the porch watching Ranger patrol the fence line with the patient determination that defined his breed. Cole stopped drinking, not through willpower or program, but because hangovers meant being less present for Sophie, and presence had become his new mission. He started sleeping through nights, not perfectly, but better. Dylan's face still appeared in dreams sometimes, but it was joined by Sophie's healing smile and Ranger's graying muzzle. The nightmares had context now. He no longer avoided mirrors. The man staring back was different from the seal he'd been, but not broken. Adapted. 2 years after that July afternoon, when Ranger had alerted to desperate digging, Cole sat on his porch watching Sophie throw a tennis ball for Ranger. The dog was 11 now, moving slower, his black and tan coat almost entirely grey around the muzzle. But his tail still wagged when Sophie laughed, a sound that had taken 18 months of therapy to emerge naturally. Sophie ran up with Ranger beside her, both panting in the California heat. "Cole, can we teach Ranger a new trick?" Cole nodded. "What did you have in mind?" "Hand signals for I love you, so he knows." They worked together on the signal, Cole showing Sophie how to make the signs clear and consistent, Sophie practicing until Ranger understood that this particular gesture meant affection, safety, belonging. When Ranger responded correctly, pressing his head against Sophie's hand, tail wagging with perfect joy, Sophie beamed. The first real smile Cole had seen from her looked exactly like the happiness she'd been denied for 8 months of captivity. "He gets it," Sophie said, wonder in her voice. "Even though he can't hear me say it, he knows." Cole watched them together. The partially deaf combat dog who'd saved a dozen lives, and one more when it mattered most, the trafficked child who'd survived and chosen to keep surviving, and himself, the lonely ex-SEAL who'd thought he'd failed everyone until he'd succeeded at the most important mission. "That's the thing about Ranger," Cole said quietly. "He doesn't need perfect hearing to understand what matters. He just needs to be present, to pay attention, to show up." Sophie looked at Cole with understanding beyond her 8 years. Like you, Cole realized she was right. Salvation hadn't come from erasing the past or achieving perfection. It had come from showing up for Ranger when no one else wanted a damaged dog, for Sophie when the system had failed her, for himself when vodka and guilt seemed easier than adaptation. They sat together on the porch, teaching hand signals to a deaf dog who understood love better than most humans. Ranger couldn't hear Sophie's laughter or Cole's quiet praise, but his tail wagged anyway, because some things didn't require sound to be true. Cole Bennett had spent 5 years believing he was broken. The SEAL, who'd failed to save a drowning recruit. But he discovered that being broken just meant being unfinished, and that the most important rescue wasn't the one that followed perfect protocol, but the one that refused to quit, even when perfect was impossible. Ranger rested his graying head on Sophie's lap, closed his eyes, and sighed contentment. Sometimes salvation finds you at your lowest point, wearing fur, asking nothing, refusing to leave until you remember who you really are.